The ancient word today is from Luke 12:13-21, parable of the rich fool. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." Our contemporary word is from Lessons in Living. Everything we need to experience a rich and meaningful life is flowing toward us in a full and complete way. So why not do the work to catch it? Why stand under Niagara Falls with only a thimble in your hand? How do we begin tapping into all this abundance? The place to start is right where you are at this very moment. It's easy to make excuses for putting off a richer life. The kids, no time, no money. I'm too old, too young, maybe next year. But this is the blessed moment. You have everything you need right now to let you take the next step toward realizing your dreams, no matter how small that step may be.
Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. One of my Petaluma friends is getting ready to move to Reno. She's lived in her house for a really long time. She lives in Pine Grove on a small ranch. And she needs to move to Reno because her husband died, and now she's going to be living next to her son. Well, she has a house full of beautiful things, as you can imagine, and also all the useful things that you need if you have a big house, kids, animals of all kinds, lots of yard work to do. So now she's down to the wire. She needs to put her place on the market because she's already purchased a place in Reno. I know how she feels. For a while in about the early 2000s, as our parents and other relatives passed away, it seemed like we would never be finished with cleaning out people's houses. And then we also had to move to a smaller house. I found myself hitting the antique stores, peddling my good furniture, and that didn't count what went to St. Vincent de Paul or to the dumpster. Today we're pretty settled in Petaluma. We have a lot of storage. In fact, maybe we have too much storage. I hardly ever need to clear out the cupboards and closets to find room for new stuff. And yet I discover myself thinking about all of the things that once were important, but now seem extraneous. I'd rather read a good book or go out in the garden than search through papers, make space in the bookshelves, come to terms with projects that I will never complete. Eventually, Jim and I will have to move into a smaller place, but it's easier to put that all into the back of my mind and just focus on what I want to do today. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. That's Jesus quoting an old proverb, You can find something like it in the book of Ecclesiastes, in Isaiah, in Tobit, in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. It reminds me of a little bon mot by sardonic jazz-age poet Dorothy Parker. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die. But alas, we never do. Alas, we never do. Parker is suggesting that when we live as if there is no tomorrow, we may wake up to discover that tomorrow has arrived after all and is biting us on the backside. That's a little different from what Jesus said, but it's a good thing to remember anyway. Never act like you're not going to be held responsible for your actions. Harsh words can never be taken back. And it's even harder to take back serious mistakes like one-night stands, binges, petty criminality. But here in Luke, Jesus is concerned about another aspect of having to pay the piper. He gives us the classic warning about concerning ourselves more with laying up treasures on earth than we do with becoming rich toward God. It's not as quite as simple as moving often enough to keep the closets clean. In Jesus' parable, God calls the rich man a fool. That was a harsh thing to say. Why was he foolish? Nobody wants to spend his life peeking around the corner all the time. In fact, modern wisdom is constantly telling us, live for today, stay in the moment, right? So what's the man's folly? Why does his plan for a pleasant retirement call down God's anger? Well, because of the way he goes about it. He's self-defeating, he's self-centered. Something is going to prevent him from continuing to grow and flourish in a number of important ways. First of all, Jesus warns us about being overly preoccupied with our possessions. We all have keepsakes and treasures, things we just need. It's when we stop owning our possessions and they start owning us that trouble arises. Have you ever heard of the bowerbird? Bowerbirds build little structures out of whatever is at hand, twigs, leaves, trash, found items. And then they decorate their front yards with any pretty or interesting thing they can find. They like stuff that's colorful or shiny. They'll pick up anything unusual. You might see a bowerbird garden with a toy soldier surrounded by yellow daisies, pop-up rings, quartz pebbles, and jello cartons. He may have a diamond ring in there with a cigarette package and copper pennies. Why does the bowerbird spend all his time accumulating junk and arranging it in attractive patterns? Well, to catch the interest of other bowerbirds, of course. He wants, first of all, to lure a female bowerbird to come into his parlor. But he also wants to keep up with the Joneses, or in other words, diss the other bowerbirds by having better stuff in his garden than they have in theirs. Bowerbirds are competitive. They're not above stealing from each other. It's every bird for himself, you see. So we don't want to be bowerbirds and let our possessions become our most defining feature, our sole pursuit and our only interest. Abundance can become a kind of poverty. If we let it take over our lives and control us, too much stuff can be disturbing as not enough stuff. And you can spend as much time trying to free yourself of the burden of stuff as someone might spend working to accumulate much more of the same items. It's a matter of perspective, isn't it? So the next item on Jesus' list is the delusion of security. We think we're self-sufficient, but guess what? Look at the rich man in the parable. He's got so much grain he doesn't even have to work for a few years. All he needs to do is build a bigger barn to store it all. The biggest irony is God waits until he's torn down the old barn before disaster strikes. Not only is there no bigger barn, there's no barn at all. Instead of plenty, he's going to have nothing. and self-sufficient. This guy's so self-sufficient that he's pathetic. He doesn't seem to need anybody else. He can provide for himself. He doesn't have anybody else in the story, either to help him or receive his support. Nobody even to mourn his passing. Self-sufficiency, Jesus suggests, is a cruel joke. It's a fallacy, a mistake. And it's also an unchristian goal. Greed is another problem associated with all this eating, drinking, and merrymaking. Greed is not wanting more of something. It's not even wanting more of something that somebody else has. That's hunger, maybe envy, definitely insecurity. Greed is holding on too tightly. It's the opposite of generosity. It isn't how much we have, it's what we do with it, right? We've all heard about the poor miser who can't spare a piece of bread for a stray dog when he's got a sock full of nickels under his mattress. We've also heard about the guy with nothing to his name who takes off his coat and gives it to a wino on a freezing night. And rich people like Kim Kardashian, you can be Kim, you can be Eleanor Roosevelt, you can be Donald Trump, or you can be Andrew Carnegie. Do I carry a $75,000 purse like the one I saw in Vogue? Or do I support breast cancer research or sponsor clean water projects in developing nations? You and I don't have as much money as a Trump or as Roosevelt, but our choices about what we do with what we have are very much the same. I've noticed that those who live for pleasure alone soon have no pleasure in anything. The greatest joy on earth has to be the act of sharing something enjoyable with a loved one and sensing their pleasure. It's not only better to give than to receive, it's also more fun. And finally, Jesus wants to warn us about a serious mistake this rich man is making, and I think that we often also make this mistake. The guy says he believes in God, but he lives as if God doesn't exist. He's a fool. Jesus even says so. If God's eye is on the sparrow, and what's this guy so worried about? Why does he hoard his harvest when he has more than enough to share? Where is his faith, his trust, his commitment? Sure, it's only human to hang on to stuff. We can't see the future. We're afraid of doing without. Holding fast to a belief in God's providence is probably the only way out of that trap. And that reminds me, I've been reading again lately about the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is a sort of combination of biblical encouragement and a self-help seminar. It's a modern version of the old theology that seemed to drive so many of our ancestors, that God's going to reward us if we are good, and consequently, those who have riches and good health must be God's favorite children. And we know that isn't so. Yet there are preachers and ministers out there that have whole ministries based on the gospel of prosperity. Do any of you remember Norman Vincent Peale? He was a very popular speaker and writer on the power of positive thinking. He was also a terrible bigot. The idea of electing John F. Kennedy, egads, a Catholic, upset him so much he actively campaigned against the very idea. But he insisted that if people, preferably white Anglo-Saxon people, would only think positively and keep repeating a few uplifting phrases, their lives would turn around and become completely wonderful. Donald Trump's mother, Mary, was a big fan of Dr. Peale. Our current president greatly admired his attitudes and his writings. Yet many theologians of his day and ours were aghast at Peale's ideas and pointed out somehow God was being left out of the equation. But But this way of thinking is, in fact, an excellent way to motivate people to want to improve their economic station, but don't want to feel guilty or repressed about it. This is a bad interpretation of the Bible. If we are prosperous and our neighbor is not, it's not God's doing. We like to think it is, but it's not. Maybe it's our own doing. Maybe it's an artifact of the time and place and circumstances of our lives, or what's going on in the rest of the world. But for the grace of God, no, not the grace of God, but happenstance. We could be toiling 2 miles underground in a diamond mine, or living on a Brazilian garbage dump. I think God gives us nothing more than our daily bread, and even that is in the form of the products of our own hands and of others. God spreads the earth before us like a banqueting table and says, "Take and eat. This is my body, which is broken for you." Maybe the best way to be rich is to be rich toward God, to be rich with God, to be in yourself and in your life a treasure chest full of the greatest treasure that can be, and that's whatever treasure we give away. Love, time, attention, laughter, comfort, kindness, peace, food, clothing, money, even just a smile or a kind word. When we share these treasures, we become richer than we ever were before. Amen.